So, so we're now live. Okay. Sure. All right, it's 2:30. Did you see my note, Jaren? Oh, okay.
We'll be getting started in a couple minutes. We just want to give everybody a chance to settle in. Thank everybody for coming today. There we go. Now I'm not muted. I want to welcome everybody to today's program on Addisleigh Park by the Queens Historical Society. My name is Jaren Halfpap. I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator here at QHS. Today's program is part of our ongoing commitment to try and bring the culture of Queens and its history to everyday people. And despite the fact that we're still not able to be open in a complete sense, we are still open virtually. So today's virtual tour of Addisleigh Park is going to be done by our board member, Rob MacKay. But today's program is by no means the only program that we have coming up. Please head to our website and check out our upcoming programs. We have one on women's history and computers coming up through a partnership with Con Edison. And we're also going to be doing one on the history of airports and travel in Queens in April. So keep an eye out for that. I want to thank, and I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Aldrich Sklar. Thank you for your donation earlier. If anybody has any, if anybody wants to support QHS and its mission, please check out the video description below. There you'll have instructions on how you can contribute to us, and you can also get a shout out on stream during our presentation today. So without further ado, I want to introduce Rob MacKay, our board member, who will be our host for today. And there you go. People can see
All
it.
right, we okay? Are we okay? You can see my face and everything?
Yep, we're good.
You poor people. Hello, just as Jaren said, my name is Rob MacKay. I'm a board member of the Queens Historical Society. And I've just written a book. It'll be published in May, but it's about historic houses in Queens. And in writing that book, I did a lot of research and took a lot of walks around Addisleigh Park I've always known about it. I'm a huge jazz fan, so it's always been special. And after reading all of the documents about its history and everything, we decided to do a virtual tour because it's too cold out and we've got COVID, of a really special neighborhood that not many people know about. But while I'm saying that, I happen to love jazz and history and Addisleigh Park. But I'm certainly aware that some people who are consuming this podcast right now might know more about any of the subjects that we go through. So at the end of this tour, please chime in with questions, chime in with extra information. Really, what this is, more than anything else, is a chance to sort of look at the houses of some of the absolute legends in the jazz world, and some others too, some entertainers, some civil rights leaders, and all that kind of stuff. I am old school, so I actually am sitting in front of a map of Queens. Now, Jaron, who's the technical guy here, he probably knows how to drop in a computer version of a map, or maybe if you're watching at home, you can just look up a map. But Addisleigh Park, it's right here. If this is Queens, Brooklyn, Rockaway, and Long Island, Addisleigh Park is right here next to St. Albans. Now, St. Albans is the bigger and sort of earlier established place. It's kind of hard to talk about St. Albans without talking about Addisleigh Park. So we'll talk a little bit about both, but mostly we're trying to focus on Addisleigh Park. And it's actually a historic district. It's basically a triangular shape, as if you have good eyes, you can see right here. It's located in Southeast Queens. It's technically sort of the western tip of St. Albans. The historic district has about 422 primary buildings, which are mostly attached and freestanding houses constructed largely between the 1910s and the 1930s, and it also includes the 11-acre St. Albans Park. There it is, St. Albans and Addisleigh right together. If you ever want to go out there, you can find this all online, but the main roads out there, there's Merrick Boulevard, 172nd Street, Sayers Avenue, Adelaide Road, Murdoch Avenue, and Linden Boulevard. Linden is probably the biggest thoroughfare. The zip code is 11412, and if you care about city council politics, it's Council District 27 and 28, represented by Danique Miller and Adrian Adams. And the funny thing about Addisleigh Park is that there's no site in history about where the name comes from. St. Albans is named after a city in England, and there's also St. Albans in Washington, D.C. That's kind of prominent. Addisleigh Park, as far as I know, and as far as anything that I've read, people don't really know why it's called Addisleigh Park. But it's there. And to give you an idea of the housing stock in the neighborhood, it's really purely suburban. Most of the houses are brick and stone and stucco. They're set on large lots, 20 to 30 feet away from the sidewalk. It's really part of the Garden City movement. There was a British guy named Sir Ebenezer Howard, who came up with this way to create sort of utopian living. And that's basically what this neighborhood is like. Some of the stuff is interesting because there are asymmetrical facades with half timbering and steeply pitched overlapping gables. And in terms of, if you're an architecture person, most of the houses are English Tudor Revival, Colonial Revival, Arts and Crafts, Mediterranean, Neo-colonial, Neoclassical, and Prairie in the most cases. So we're talking about pretty big houses on pretty big lots in an area with a lot of trees and other things. Now, the history of Addisleigh Park, and I know you want to look at the houses. We'll get to them in a second. But first, you got to listen to the history. The history of Addisleigh Park is not that much different from the rest of Queens and the rest of New York. It was mostly, if you wanted to go big, Algonquin was the native tribe that lived there. The Dutch came in and via a land grant from Peter Stuyvesant, who people call the governor, but really he was the sort of district manager of the Dutch West Indies Company. In 1965, he made a land grant to settlers, and they established farms there. Some of the famous names that lived there were the Remsons, the Everetts, the Ludlums, the Hendricksons, and then the Francis family. In fact, the Francis farm lived on for a long time. So for many centuries, it was farming and very low populated. In fact, St. Albans, the entire St. Albans only had about 600 people when Queens became part of New York City in 1898. Then, of course, a couple things happened. First was the establishment of a Long Island Railroad stop in St. Albans. And that, of course, and then, of course, the invention of the car and the ability to drive, and when it became available to middle-class people, the fact that the roads were then paved and they got electricity and all that made another big thing. So it also went through a phase when it was actually, there was a big golf course there. In fact, Babe Ruth in the 1920s used to love to play golf there. The Depression pretty much got rid of the golf course. So that's basically what we're talking about. It's necessary to say that I mean, we really can't go without saying that in the 1910s to the 1930s, there were covenants attached to the deeds that prohibited white people from selling to non-white people. So restrictive covenants. They actually went to court in 1948. There were two. There was a state level court case where the judge actually said, "Hey, it's in the contract. A deed is a deed. We can't break this." But then on the federal level, in 1948, in the case Shelley v. Kramer, they decided that these kind of restrictive covenants were in fact racist and actually against the 14th Amendment protections that people had. So that's basically what the neighbors like. There were a lot of neighbors would tell on other neighbors who were selling houses to minorities. Jaron, can we start with the first house? And the first house is actually kind of important, I would say, to the whole thing. Just wait till it starts rolling. Really, what happened was that even though there were laws against it, is this rolling, Jaron?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I can't see it. Oh, okay, maybe it's better that way. What you're looking at is Fats Waller's house. Now, Fats Waller, there was a lot of people were buying houses on the down low. And Fats Waller is believed to be the first African-American to buy property, and that's actually it right there. If you look at it, there's a little plaque on the front door that shows that talks about how this was sort of historic. Fats Waller, if you don't know, he was a stride piano player and a composer. I think he actually copyrighted more than 600 songs over his life. Two songs, Ain't Misbehavin', which is probably the biggest one, and Honeysuckle Rose are in the Grammy Hall of Fame. Actually, my note says he copyrighted more than 400 songs. But if you know Ain't Misbehavin' that he plays with the stride piano, that was kind of the big one. Can you show the photo of Fats Waller, John? Or is that going to take too much time?
I'll pop it in and just.
Okay. So we're just going to show you Fats Waller. Fats Waller lived there. The address right there is 173-19 Sayers Avenue. He lived there. He bought the place in 1940, which is, of course, before the court or the Supreme Court action in 1948. And he lived there until he died. He apparently had a great stride piano that was installed in there. That brings me to the next segment, which I want to talk about, which is why Addisleigh Park. If this place has these covenants that are really sort of that are obviously unfair to African Americans, why are they moving there? And actually, Addisleigh Park and all of Queens, we had a lot of jazz greats that lived there. with the building of a couple of the bridges. A lot of them would play. Obviously, the Cotton Club is the most famous, but the Roseland Ball Land and the Savoy Ballroom and the Woodside Hotel, they would play jams there. And then with the invention of with the car becoming accessible to the middle class, and with the creation of highways and bridges, Queens actually was a great place to live. You could have a nice house, you could have land, you could still be close to Manhattan, where the work was, and you're also close to the airport if you're traveling a lot. Addisleigh Park had its fair share of famous jazz people, but for example, Louis Armstrong lived in Corona. A lot of people know that. Dizzy Gillespie lived for a while. Jimmy Heath, who recently passed away, lived there, and others that we will get to right now. So can we then go to the next one? Now, are they seeing what you should be seeing right there?
Sorry, Rob, you're cutting out just a little bit while we wait for the technology to catch up. We're going to give them a bit of time.
17537 time so we can get there.
Oh, Rob, are you back? There we go.
I'm there. Is it up?
Now we are. Okay. You're rolling.
Are we seeing Brook Benton on the...
Yes.
Okay. So Brook Benton, he was another, he actually, probably his famous song was A Rainy Night in Georgia. The president of the Queens Historical Society is not on this call, but that's his absolute favorite song. It was recorded in 1947. He's also famous for Baby, You Got What It Takes with Dinah Washington. And he was one of the more prominent musicians. Can we plop in this photo I have? We have a pretty good photo of him and two of his kids, one of which is Brook Jr., and they are riding a bicycle in front, right on the block in front of his house on Murdoch Avenue. That came out in a 1953 Ebony article. There are a bunch of photos in that article of Brook Benton and his home. There's actually one with he's carrying a rifle because apparently he loved to hunt. But there's a couple photos of the interior of his house and other stuff. But he was truly, one of the greats. All right, we go on to the next one, which should be 17519 Linden Boulevard. Is it a house with a turret?
Yep.
Okay. So that house, the first person who bought that was a guy named Cootie Williams, who obviously was famous in his own right. He was a jazz trumpeter and a band leader, but he sold the house to James Brown, none other than the hardest working man in show business, James Brown. James Brown lived there from 1962 into the early 1970s. Now, at the time, you can't see it now, but at the time there was a moat around it, and there were like security fences, and they had JB all over. He, of course, was so busy. He wasn't home that much, but that is where, in fact, he won, according to my notes, as I just said. He lived there from 1962 to 1970. Oh, and in addition to a moat, he had a drawbridge. So it went from Cootie Williams, the trumpeter, to James Brown, the hardest working man in show business. Now, I don't think we have a photo of him. Do you want to show it? It's not everyone knows who James Brown is, so it might not be worth it. All right, so the next, can you set up? The next is a man on the street video. Please stay tuned. Jaron is going to play a man on the street video.
Well, W.E.B. Du Bois doesn't need much of an introduction, but I'll just say he was a scholar, a historian, a writer, and a Pan-Africanist. He actually died in Ghana, but he lived here with his wife Shirley, who was also a writer and somewhat of a historian. He is actually one of a lot of prominent members of the civil rights movement who lived in here in Addisleigh Park. Um, the head of the AACP, Roy Wilkins, lived here, and so did Percy Sutton. Percy Sutton was a big player in the Harlem political machine, but he actually lived out here. While I'm at it, the other prominent person from this area is Al Roker, who was a meteorologist, and then he became a morning show personality, and now he's all over the place. I'd also mention a woman named Anna Lee Tingle Fisher, who I'd actually never heard of until I looked her up. She was a famous astronaut, and she grew up here too. This place,
I'm actually not seeing any of that, Jaron. Yeah? Okay, thanks.
So the video's finished, and you are.
Are we back on? Did you do Roy Campanella?
We can transition to Roy. I've got W.E.B. Du Bois' picture up first, if you want to talk about
Okay, what was that right there? So what did they just see?
Man on the Street for W.E.B. Du Bois.
Okay. Okay. W.E.B. Du Bois. So there were a lot of famous entertainers that lived in St. Albans. However, there were also many people of other works of life, including W.E.B. Du Bois, who people describe him as a historian, a sociologist, a Pan-Africanist. He wrote a lot of books. He married Shirley Graham Du Bois, who from that house right there. They lived there for a little bit, but they have obviously they moved. They haven't lived there forever. In the photo, are they seeing a photo, Jaron?
Yes.
In the photo, that's W.E.B. Du Bois and his wife Shirley Graham with Kwame Nkrumah, who was the president of Ghana. You might remember he was the first post-colonial president of Ghana. His wife was known as Madame Nkrumah. So that's where they are in that photo. Other people, Percy Sutton, who was also very involved in politics. You might associate him with Harlem and the Harlem sort of political machine, but he lived there. He lived on 11419, 179th Street. And Roy Wilkins, who was the head of the ANCP for a long time, he lived there. And everyone's favorite weatherman, Al Roker, actually is from there. You might have to go over to St. Albans to make sure that's true. Anyway, can we go with the next video, please, Mr. House?
All right. Well,
and then tell me what it is.
Disclosure time. I'm a proud board member of the Queens Historical Society. I work for the Queens Economic Development Corporation and run the Queens Tourism Council.
Okay.
Plus, I got married and raised my kids in Queens.
Roy Campanella, I have a little bit of a confession to make.
Very old Brooklyn family. My father was born there. My grandparents were born there. And I think even my great-grandparents were born here. They were all huge Brooklyn Dodgers fans. And of course, they loved Jackie Robinson, whose house we've seen. They also loved Duke Schneider and, not so much Ralph Branca, because he gave up the shot heard around the world. But one of their favorite players was Roy Campanella. Roy Campanella lived right here. He was actually half Italian. He grew up in Steel Country, Pennsylvania, with an Italian father and African-American mother. He was an all-star in 1950. He was part of the 1955 Brooklyn Dodgers that won the World Series. He was really one of the best players on the team. And this is where he chose to hang his hat when he wasn't catching balls. He was a catcher.
I did it. Okay. So that's Roy Campanella. I came from as I said in that video, I come from a huge Brooklyn Dodger fan family, and Roy Campanella was. We talked about him more at Thanksgiving than we talked about our family members. He actually ended up. The salaries were kind of low back then, but as he went along, he ended up making a higher salary as baseball salaries in general went up, and he moved to Glen Cove. He got in a car accident on an icy road in Glen Cove, which shortened his career. So if he had stayed in Addisleigh Park, he would not have had that accident, if I can just say. Anyway, the next one coming up, Jaron, Okay, now this guy, the next one up is Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson really doesn't need an introduction. He broke the color barrier in sports. He was all-star. He won a World Series, as did Roy Campanella with the Brooklyn Dodgers. He was the first African-American baseball player to be in an all-star game and the first African-American baseball player to be inducted in the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1962. He lived at 112 40 177th Street from 1949 to 1956. So while he was starring on the Brooklyn fields, he was living and relaxing in the Queens, in the Addisleigh Park suburbs. It's my understanding that because he was so famous, there were people constantly going by his house and knocking on his door and everything. And so they eventually moved up to Connecticut. And a lot of times when you hear people talking about Jackie Robinson and his family, they say Connecticut. It's because they did move up there. And I think it was basically to get away from the constant. I mean, they wanted to have a little privacy. So that's that. Next up, my friend, is Illinois Jacquet, right? Okay. Illinois Jacquet, they were born in, and his brother Russell, they were born in New Orleans and grew up in Texas. Really big in the jazz scene for a really long time, and they actually lived right next to each other, which is kind of interesting. You can see in that video on one side there's Illinois' hat. He was probably the bigger of the in terms of star and national prominence and all that. He was the bigger, but he lived right across the street from his brother, which is kind of cool. And help me more. What's coming up next? A photo. Oh, okay. Yeah, there he is. Okay, I should probably say, just to let you know how big the two brothers were, Illinois Jacquet was the tenor saxophone, like that photo shows. He and his brother was a trumpeter. They played with Mingus, they played with Lionel Hampton, Cab Calloway, Count Basie, and all that stuff. I mean, that's as big as you can get. Ella Fitzgerald, a Trisket, a Trasket. She lived in Corona for a while. I've been to her house in Corona, but she also lived right at the house that you're looking at right now. Oh, okay. Sorry. We'll have it's actually you're gonna actually have to watch me on the street talking about it. Darren, can you please share the video?
I'm not so good at it, but this is Ella Fitzgerald's house, the Queen of Scat. She lived here, but it's also worth mentioning that she also lived in Corona, so she actually lived in two Queens neighborhoods. I just want to say that this neighborhood, besides the fact that it's absolutely beautiful, there's really great stucco everywhere. So there's stucco, there's wood, there's red brick, there's really just about everything here. And if I can just talk for a second about why a lot of the people moved here. You know, there was everyone has heard about the Cotton Club, but there was also the Savoy, stomping at the Savoy, Roseland. There are all kinds of ballrooms where jazz players had steady gigs playing both in Harlem and Manhattan. And when they built the bridges, like the Triborough Bridge, Queens became a great place to live. You could work at night at the club, perform at night, drive back with your car over a bridge and be here in no time. So this was actually a very great place to live. You had peace of mind. You spent your days or your nights really in Manhattan dealing with all that, and then you came here to the peaceful neighborhood with birds and trees. All right, gonna get me to.
So Ella Fitzgerald. All right. The next person up is a politician. His name is Archie Spigner, and he was a trailblazer as well. He was born in the South, came to the North and ended up he was a bus driver, ended up getting involved in their union, and then parlayed that into a city council membership. And he served on the city council from 1973 to 2002. They enacted term limits. He kind of could have gone forever. He was very, very popular. He's one of those politicians that everyone liked. And he was there for a long time. He was deputy majority leader for a while. He lived at 11210 175th Street, and he was the first African-American to become a member of the city council. People used to call him the Godfather and stuff like that because he was very involved in the local political club, which was the Gaillard Brewer United Democratic Club. He was also a district leader, and he actually, they named a post office after him on 195-104 Linden Boulevard, which would be St. Albans. There's a post office named after him. Now, it's not that atypical to have a post office named after you, but they named it after him while he's still alive. And city law has always been that they won't name any street or any other location after someone until he died. But he was so big that I guess Gregory Meeks, the congressman at the time, and other people put it together, and he actually could attend the ceremony when they named the post office after him. Do you want to show a photo of him? We have a photo. Oh, okay. All right. So next up is okay, Count Basie. Now, Count Basie, you know, so for a long time, when the covenants were still being enforced and African Americans were sort of surreptitiously buying up properties and no one was talking about it, Count Basie was an international figure because he had the Count Basie Orchestra. And when he bought a house there, that's when everyone knew. There was no secret sales going on when Count Basie was there. Now the house that you're seeing, apparently the address is 174-27 Adelaide Road. He lived there from 1940 to 1982. Now, he was a pianist and an organist, but he really was a band leader and a composer. I think that's really where he was most famous. I was never invited, but I heard that he had unbelievable pool parties. You can kind of imagine all that talent getting together on an afternoon and having fun. There must have been some really, really fun parties. And it's also my understanding that it hasn't happened yet, but there is at least an effort to turn his house into a museum. But we'll have to get more on that. There's nothing, that's really just a rumor, so maybe I shouldn't even be reporting it. So, all right, what's up next, my friend? Oh, okay. Yeah, shall we skip the Jason segment? There's another segment. There's a house that they're trying to get historic status for that's outside of the district. We can show it. Do you want to show it? Or we'll show it at the end. Okay. So we're going to Joe Louis. All right, Joe Louis. Joe Louis was called the Detroit Bomber. He was the heavyweight boxer. They called him the Detroit Bomber because he grew up in Detroit. He was actually born in Alabama, but he grew up in Detroit. But guess where he lived? He actually lived right next to Brook Benton. So the photos that we showed of Brook Benton riding his bicycle, I believe that's Joe Louis's house in the background. And people probably know Joe Louis. He was the #1 heavyweight in the heavyweight division. And he was the boxer when they would put the Great White Hopes against him, like Kurt Schmeling, and they had and he would beat them all. And he was the world heavyweight boxing champion from 1937 to 1949. He married a woman named Rose Morgan, and he lived at that house that you're seeing right now from 1955 to 1958. And again, it's Murdoch Avenue. It's right next to Brook Benton's place. Later on, Joe Louis actually moved. He actually died in Las Vegas, where he was living at the time. But he lived there a large chunk of his life. And it's probably worth mentioning that he wasn't the only boxer to live there. A bunch of boxers lived there. And some of the other athletes that were there, and I'll tell you right now, Mike Merriweather, who played for the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Minnesota Vikings, football player, linebacker, he made the Pro Bowl. And Floyd Patterson also lived there. He was the pretty famous heavyweight boxer. And actually Bob Cousy, he's 1950s, one of those old Celtic guys from the White Boy Set Shot League. He grew up there, and he was an all-star, and he played for the Boston Celtics. He actually grew up in the neighborhood. He didn't live there. He probably lived in Boston. All right, shall we go on to the next? Sure, we're going to show a quick picture of Joe Louis, known as the Detroit Bomber, but hey, he could also be known as the Queens Resident. Okay. Lena Horne, the hits just keep on coming. Now what you're looking at now is Lena Horne's house. I've been out there a couple of times, and I've got to say, whoever lives there does a great job of gardening and tending to the house. Now, Lena Horne, you might know her as a singer, or you might know her as a film star, because she was both. She was born in Brooklyn, but she lived at that house that you're seeing right now. She had to move pretty soon thereafter because she had to be in Los Angeles. So she only lived there a couple of years and then went out to Hollywood. I mean, the film world was calling her. What can you do? You got to be where the job is what it comes down to. But that's Lena Horne's house right there. Okay. I'm sorry? Oh, okay. Mercer Ellington. Duke Ellington. Everyone knows who Duke Ellington is. Well, his son, Mercer Ellington, who was also actually Mercer Ellington led Duke Ellington's band at the end. So Mercer Ellington lived at 11302 175th Street. He was also a band leader, a composer, and a singer. And it just kind of shows you, they say that, well, I don't want to get, I think he might have used his father's money to buy that house, but he lived there. And it really shows you how all of the bigs were right there. It's, the talent attracts talent. People want to be with other people that have similar interests. And a lot of those different players that you're seeing, they all would play with each other's bands, or they would get called up for a few gigs here and there, go on tour. Like, it was just all, but they all came back to Addisleigh Park. And now are we on Milt the Judge? Okay. So Milton Hinton, who was also known as the Judge, he was a bass player. But he also he was really big on photography, and he wrote a bunch of books. He was known for all three, and in fact, you can go to, there's a website in his honor. It's Milt Hinton, or they called him the Judge. He lived with his wife Mona right there at 173-05 113th Avenue. They lived there 50 years, from 1950 until his death. Hinton, I think, got his start really with Cab Calloway, but he also played with pretty much everyone else, including Louis Armstrong and Benny Goodman. He is credited with appearing on more recordings than any other musician in the world. He played with basically every jazz musician that you know of. Besides the one I mentioned, he played with Duke Ellington and John Coltrane, the Marsalis brothers, even Barbra Streisand, Bette Midler, and Paul McCartney. Now, if we have a photo, if you can drop in a photo, thanks to a civic action, in 2006, the street where they lived for 50 years was officially designated Milt Hinton Place. They didn't, a lot of the other musicians didn't get that honor, but he was there for 50 years. The city, with a whole unveiling ceremony and all that, named the street that he lived off Milt Hinton Place. Now this might be the time. Coming up next. All right, so before we get onto the mural, I just want to say there are other musicians that we didn't mention because we don't want to take all your time, but Earl Bostic, who was a saxophonist and composer, played a lot with Lionel Hamilton and Cab Calloway. He lived there. Wild Bill Davis, William Davis, jazz pianist. He lived there. And for modern people, LL Cool J grew up near there, basically. A Tribe Called Quest, which is the rap group that had Phife Dawg and Q-Tip in it, they all grew up near there. And that brings us to the final part. And tell me what they're looking at.
All right. Right here, we're at a place called St. Albans Greatest. They all lived here. That's the name of this mural that runs right here. We're on Linden Boulevard at the Long Island Railroad train stop for St. Albans. Addisleigh Park is right there, and as we mentioned, Addisleigh Park is an enclave. St. Albans that comes over here. Now this was commissioned in 1983, done by actually a Jamaican-born muralist named Joe Stevenson. That's Jackie Robinson and Roy Campanella right here. Those are some of the athletes. Here are some of the other famous people that live there. Count Basie, as you can see. Billie Holiday. We forgot to mention Billie Holiday. Illinois Jacquet, one of our favorites. Ella Fitzgerald is right there. Lena Horne, we've been to her house too. Brook Benton, our cameraman's favorite. There's Judge Hinton. There's John Coltrane, who lived right up there on Mexican Street. Here's Fats Waller. And here's James Brown. It's worth mentioning that this was organized, this effort was organized by the St. Albans Civic Improvement Association.
Okay. All right. So that what you're seeing right there is a mural on Linden Boulevard. It's actually right where the Long Island Railroad station is.
Sorry, we're having a bit of technical issues with the internet connection.
A major sort of beginnings of the development of the Abraham. Now this mural was. Oh, okay. What should I do?
All right. Okay, now you're back. If you want to restart.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, I understand there were just some technical difficulties. Maybe it's because I talked too loud, but the mural right there, St. Albans Greatest, was actually done by a Jamaican island of Jamaica, not neighborhood of Jamaica artist named Joe Stevenson. It depicts all of the it's entertainment industry. It's the athletes, as you can see, the athletes on one side, the entertainers on the other. It was refurbished in 2004, and it sits right on the train trestle where the St. Albans Long Island Railroad Station is, which of course was one of the main aspects to the development of the neighborhood. And it's basically where you hit St. Albans, because again, St. Albans and Addisleigh Park are pretty much intertwined. I mean, they're right next to each other. So, Jared, how we doing on the tech? Okay.
So we're going to switch over to Q&A now.
Let me say thank you to everybody who watched this. It is our pleasure to bring, we can talk about Queens and Queens history forever, but we're wondering right now if there's anybody maybe who lives in the neighborhood or who loves jazz, who wants to say anything more, or if you have any questions, we're here for any questions.
So,
and Jaron, how does that work? Do they type it to you?
Yep, just type your questions into chat and I'll read them out to Rob. We do have a question here from Nijelks. What is the difference between St. Albans and Addisleigh Park?
Sure. So St. Albans, St. Albans, it touches Addisleigh Park. St. Albans is here. Addisleigh Park is right there. But St. Albans, it's bigger, and more people. It's people would often say that they're from there. Like I said, it has the post office, it has the Long Island Railroad stop, blah 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 blah. But they are two distinct neighborhoods. I've heard people say that Addisleigh Park is the western section of St. Albans. But it's they're right there. They're right next to each other. They touch each other.
Okay.
If it's raining in St. Albans, it's probably raining in Addisleigh Park.
All right. We had a question from Lisa.
If I can add one thing, remember,
Yeah.
there's the historic district. There's the Addisleigh Park Historic District, and the actual historic district, which the city granted it in 2011, is just Addisleigh Park. And it might also be worth knowing that John Coltrane, who was another great jazz musician, he lived just in the St. Albans part on Mexico Street. We didn't include him in this because he didn't actually live in the historic district.
Okay. We also had another question from the same person. If you could disclose cross streets. I know we did for some of them, but...
Sure. Sure, I can tell you that. Okay, so the Addisleigh, going around, the Addisleigh Park Historic District goes Merrick Boulevard, 111th Road, 172nd Street, Sayers Avenue, Marney Place, Adelaide Road, Murdoch Avenue, and Linden Boulevard. Now, if you're looking it up, if you're going to use it on maps.com or something like that, you might want to type in the zip code. The zip code is 11412. So something tells me if you want to look it up on the internet, I would suggest typing in maybe James Brown's house, which is 175-19 Linden Boulevard. That's 175-19 Linden Boulevard. James Brown and Cootie Williams. And that's on the edge, and it goes straight in there.
John Earl Stevens III asks, so it's not a park? Can you explain the why it's got a park in the name?
Queens doesn't make any sense. Rego Park, if you know Rego Park in Queens, that name actually comes because the construction company that built most of the houses there was called Real Good Construction.
Oh, you're starting to cut out.
Real Good and became called Rego Park. But as I said at the beginning of the show of this, Addisleigh Park, nobody knows what it comes from. St. Albans, we know, is named after a town in England. Addisleigh Park, there's no record that says why they chose to name it Addisleigh Park. The way it's spelled makes me think that it's British. But there is no historic evidence as to why they called it Addisleigh Park. Island Park in Long Island. There's no park in Island Park, Long Island either. If anyone knows the answer, I'd love to have that information.
Ade has a very interesting
why
theory.
Queens is called Queens and Jamaica is called Jamaica, but yes, a question.
Ade has a very interesting theory.
Okay.
Addis means in New Aramaic, an Ethiopian language. It means new in Aramaic language. So I wonder if Addisleigh means new meadow.
Oh, wow. Look at that. That's very interesting. I mean, there's Addis Ababa is the capital of Ethiopia, so that means new Ababa. I didn't realize that. I'm not quite sure.
Claudette has a question. There are several houses on the other side of Linden that are large and similarly designed. Are they part of the same historic district?
What was the address of that? Linden Boulevard.
Yeah, Linden.
Linden Boulevard, if they are from about 165th to about 185th, then yeah, you're good right there. A lot of those might not be in the historic district, but they still were built at the same time by the same companies and with the same architectural style. They had the same architects. At the beginning, I talked about how the whole area was part of the Garden City movement, which was an English urban planning style where you would have houses set back from the sidewalks, usually 20 to 30 feet. In fact, the original deeds said they had to be set back. And most of since the houses were built basically in the early 1900s, mostly 1910 to 1930, the houses in that area have the popular style of the time. And that includes, you'll see Tudors and colonial revivals and Mediterranean and neo-colonial styles. It might be, just in case, if you know on Linden Boulevard, if you know what we're talking about, right near where the train trestle is, where the mural is, right there's the Veterans Affairs building. That whole land right there was where the golf course was, where Babe Ruth played golf.
Before we move on to the next question, I want to give a quick shout out to the Addisleigh Park Civic Organization who's here in chat today. I want to thank you guys for coming out. They invite everybody to come out to visit the neighborhood once the pandemic is over. And having been out there myself to take some of these videos, I have to agree. It's a wonderfully walkable neighborhood, a lovely place to just kind of relax for a bit.
Well, if it's possible, maybe we could do a walking tour where once COVID is over and it stops snowing every day, I would love to walk around there with people that live there and people that have stories and stuff. That would be really fun if they're up to. Do we have their contact information?
Yes, we can get in contact after the program. That sounds like a wonderful idea. Okay. We've got a question here from Cynthia who wants to know the relationship between the entertainers and athletes in Addisleigh Park and Harlem.
That is Cynthia. Is it Cynthia Stampleman? That might be my mother. Yes. So they're obviously. Obviously they were intertwined. Harlem was a center, and Addisleigh Park was as well. So yeah, and a lot, like as I said during the actual speech, a lot of them worked in the nightclubs that were in Harlem and all around Manhattan. And actually, St. Albans had a nightclub for a while. There was a live music scene in St. Albans as well.
Priscilla is surprised that you didn't mention any history of St. Albans Park. Do you have anything to add about that?
Oh, okay. Well, except for the fact that it's 11 acres and it's included in the district, I don't. Sorry. I've been there. It's nice.
Robin was asking where Billie Holiday lived, since we accidentally skipped that house.
I'd have to look that up.
Okay.
Billie Holiday. Yeah, let me get back to her on that.
And then somebody actually asked if you had a contact information, if people had further questions, if you would be willing to leave an email address.
Sure. I would like to leave an email address, and I would like, especially the Civic Association out there, if they could contact me, just use Robert. My name is Rob MacKay, so it's Robert with the letters AZO. So ROBERTAZO, and then at Hotmail. And I think I know why we didn't do Billie Holiday, and it was because I couldn't actually find the address. I looked in a couple of different places. If you know, Flushing Town Hall actually has a jazz trail. It's a map which shows you where all the different jazz greats lived, and they might have it, but I remember not being able to find the actual street address. It just says, according to this, which is from Central Queens Historical Association, she lived near Linden Boulevard. So unfortunately, I wish I had that, but we weren't able to find it, and so it's not included.
Yeah,
But
Helen
yes, the
Helen
Angel of
Bryan
Harlem
echoes
lived
that.
in Queens. Yeah, along with the Detroit bomber, the Angel of Harlem lived in Queens, and the Brooklyn Dodgers, they lived in Queens. Thank you.
So Priscilla wanted to add a little bit about what she thinks is the St. Albans Park was added by the artists as a sanctuary for their families, according to what she's heard. We also have
Fatswaller's house looks out at the park, and actually, the Dubois house and Count Basie house is right next. Is about, they're in a little bit, but they're right next to the park as well.
We also have a question. Do you know where the jazz clubs were? Were they on Linden or were they outside of this area?
That I don't know.
Okay. And I think this will probably be the last question before we wrap up today. Does the main library hold the city archives for Queens? I believe you're referring to the Jamaica branch of the Queens Library.
So the Queens Public Library has digital archives that you can get online. You don't have to go to the main branch. And the only thing I can say is that the search engine, it takes so long. But you can go on the Queens Library. There is a digital archive section, and if you press on the digital archive section, you can then type in, search words and find different historical photos of Queens. That's not the only one. The Library of Commerce has digital archives, which are pretty good. The New York Historical Society has some pretty good photos on their archives too. But in any of those cases, the term that they usually use is digital archives.
Okay.
You can actually, some of the photos are free, and some of them you have to pay for the copywriting session. But it's the Queens Public Library. They charge $10 or something like that per photo. So, and I had a pretty good photo of Jackie Robinson and his wife and his son in front of their house, but it was through the Jackie Robinson Foundation or whatever, and they don't give away the copyright, so we couldn't add it. We also have a photo of Lena Horne with a dog in front of a house, but it doesn't confirm that it's Addisleigh Park, so we couldn't use it on this presentation either.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody in chat who's been talking amongst themselves and contributing other important information, like Babe Ruth also lived in Addisleigh Park, and that when they developed Count Basie's house, they kind of changed it up and it got rid of the pool, which can be pretty disappointing. Before we go, Rob, someone's looking out for you and is wondering more information about your book.
Oh, well, thank you. Was that a plant? Is that like, did my daughter say that question? I wrote a book. So if you know Arcadia Publishing specializes in historic books. You've probably seen them. They have sepia covers, and they're all over. There's like I saw a history of Sausalito, California, and all that kind of stuff. There have been a number of Arcadia books on Queens that are all available. In fact, the president of our board, Jason Antos, has written 7 books on with Arcadia Publishing, including the one on Shea Stadium, which is their bestseller, believe it or not. But I wrote a book. Its title is Historic Houses of Queens, and it has about 150 minimum. It has about 190 photos of historic houses in Queens. It's about 225 pages long. And it covers the entire borough, historic houses that have the actual stuff, and some that were really prominent but were torn down. And then in a couple of cases, such as Addisleigh Park and the Far Rockaway bungalows and Parkway Village, which are historic districts, I didn't go into the one house, but the whole district. And like I said, we cover 48 of them. It's all done. It's been written and edited and everything. It comes out on May 10th, and you are welcome to buy it. It makes a great housewarming gift, great Easter gift, great Christmas gift, great Hanukkah gift, all 9 days of Hanukkah. Buy it, give it, read it, be my guest.
All right. So we're going to start to wrap up. I want to thank everybody for coming out today. I encourage you guys to please come to our website, www.queenshistoricalsociety.org. There you will be able to find our links where you can become a member to support our museum and our mission. I encourage you guys to come check out our future programs, and we will see you guys at our next virtual showing.
And before we go, a special thank you to you, Jaron Halfpap. People don't know this, but Jaron, Queens Historical Society is headquartered in a historic house called Kingsland Homestead, and Jaron actually lives there and keeps it going, keeps it from falling down. And he does all of this behind the scenes work, such as all the tech work for this, which I'm personally not capable of doing. So thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who consumed this today. It is strictly our pleasure. We love Queens. We love history. We hope to offer many more programs. We got tons of ideas, and we have many more programs coming up. So please don't be a stranger, okay?